The Apollo 11 photos show astronauts on the moon, but the sky behind them is pitch black, with no stars visible. Conspiracy theorists argue that since the moon has no atmosphere to block the stars, they should have been visible. NASA, however, explained that the camera settings used for capturing the bright lunar surface wouldn't have picked up the faint light of distant stars. In the footage of the astronauts planting the US flag, the flag appears to wave as though in the wind. But the moon has no atmosphere and therefore no wind. NASA's rebuttal is that the flag was supported by a horizontal rod to keep it extended, and the waving was simply caused by the motion of planting the flag and the residual vibration. In several images, the shadows cast by objects and astronauts on the moon's surface appear to fall in different directions. On Earth, such differences could occur with multiple light sources, like studio lights. But on the moon, the only light source is the sun. NASA explained that uneven lunar terrain could create such effects. In one iconic photo, a reflection in astronaut Buzz Aldrin's helmet shows what some claim is a mysterious figure not wearing a spacesuit, as well as a suspiciously bright light. Conspiracy theorists think it might be a stagehand or production light from a studio. NASA says this is simply an optical illusion, possibly caused by equipment on the lunar module. A photograph from the Apollo 16 mission shows a rock that appears to have the letter C engraved on it. Skeptics argue that this was a prop, like in a movie set, and that the C was a marker used for staging. NASA explains that this is simply a printing flaw in the photo, or a stray hair or fiber on the scanner when the photo was reproduced. To get to the moon, astronauts had to pass through the Van Allen radiation belts, which surround Earth. Some conspiracy theorists argue that the radiation levels are so high that the astronauts would have been fried unless NASA used special shielding far beyond the technology of the time. NASA has stated that the astronauts were in the belts for a relatively short time and were adequately shielded by their spacecraft. The iconic footprint left by Neil Armstrong is incredibly crisp and detailed, almost too perfect for the moon's dusty surface. Some argue that such precise imprints could only be made on a damp, Earth-like surface. NASA explained that the fine lunar dust, with no atmosphere or wind to disturb it, preserved the shape perfectly. The Apollo 11 landing was broadcast live to millions of people on Earth, and the footage quality was surprisingly good given the technology available in 1969. Some argue that NASA couldn't have possibly achieved this with the technology of the time, and that the footage was filmed on Earth, using state-of-the-art cameras. NASA explains that the cameras used were specially designed to function in space. Some conspiracy theorists claim that the entire moon landing was filmed in a Hollywood studio, and that famed director Stanley Kubrick, fresh off his film 2001, A Space Odyssey, was hired to create the realistic-looking footage. They argue that NASA didn't have the technology to land humans on the moon, but did have access to Kubrick's innovative filmmaking techniques. NASA, of course, has denied these claims. Some people believe that the famous flag that was planted on the moon fell over shortly after being planted, but NASA didn't show that part of the footage. They claim that the flag falling would reveal that gravity was different than expected, suggesting it was filmed on Earth and not on the moon. NASA says the flag was designed to be stiff to prevent it from falling, and it remained upright during the mission. Some moon landing photos and videos show strange objects in the sky, which conspiracy theorists claim could be alien spacecraft observing the mission. NASA has consistently denied any sightings of UFOs during Apollo missions, attributing the anomalies to camera glitches, reflections, or other photographic artifacts. Some conspiracy theorists argue that NASA faked only the first moon landing, Apollo 11, to win the space race, but the other Apollo missions that followed were real. They believe that after achieving their political goal of beating the Soviet Union, NASA no longer needed to fake subsequent landings and was able to achieve real moon missions by then. Some people argue that while the launch of Apollo 11 was real, the astronauts never made it to the moon. Instead, they orbited Earth while the staged landing was broadcast. The footage of their return to Earth, they claim, was a continuation of the elaborate hoax. NASA, of course, has detailed logs of the mission, but skeptics continue to believe that the return was faked. After the Apollo 11 astronauts returned to Earth, conspiracy theorists pointed out that during press conferences, they seemed unusually tense and uncomfortable. Some claim this was because they were lying about the landing, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong's solemn expressions, according to these theories, are signs of guilt or anxiety over maintaining the secret. NASA has explained that the astronauts were exhausted from their journey and the intense public scrutiny. Some conspiracy theorists argue that the lunar module, the craft used to land on the moon's surface, looks too flimsy and fragile to have survived space travel. They claim it resembles something built for a movie set rather than a high-tech piece of equipment capable of landing on the moon. NASA has detailed the rigorous testing and design of the module, but skeptics remain unconvinced. In a controversial admission, NASA has said that they lost much of the original data from the Apollo missions, including telemetry data, video footage, and blueprints for the Saturn V rocket. Conspiracy theorists have latched onto this, arguing that NASA lost the data to cover up the fact that the moon landings were faked. NASA explains that the missing tapes were likely reused or misplaced during archival processes over the decades. The space race was part of the larger Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. Some conspiracy theorists believe the moon landing was faked to demonstrate US superiority over the Soviets, boosting morale and political dominance without actually achieving the landing. NASA, on the other hand, maintains that the missions were legitimate and fulfilled America's goal to land on the moon first.